Tottenham losing at home by 2-0 against Aston Villa. For more on this, let's welcome in, shall we, Stevie Nicol, Frank Leboeuf and Julien Laurent. Before we hear from them, God, this was bad, wasn't it, from Spurs?
Rotten. Just a continuation, really. And I understand, look, this is the first day of the transfer window, so obviously there's been nothing happened leading into this game. Whether that changes between now and the end of January for Tottenham, that remains to be seen. And they were missing, you know, Richarlison, Mora, Kulusevski, Bentancur, who has had a problem since the World Cup. I understand all that. However, you still managed to put a half-decent team out on the field, but you've continued to play in the same manner that you've played recently. I mean, it is just so tough to watch. It's Harry Kane, if you were listening to commentary, most people were, went 20 minutes, around the 20-minute mark before he even touched the ball.
Right.
I mean, it's quite scary, really. So the buck stops with him. I can take defeat. I can sit and watch Tottenham or any team losing, particularly with this kind of squad, that having spent a couple of $100 million+ in the summer, I can accept that defeat happens, but he's responsible for performance as well as results, and we're seeing neither at the moment from this Tottenham side. And he's managing to get a tune out of some around him who seem to be happy to be jumping on his bandwagon, that is, we're just never, ever... Oh, it was a miracle. What you don't understand was, last year was a miracle. I'm a magician getting this team in the top 4. I was wonderful last year. And now it's just about the squad, and it's really not my fault, basically, is what he's saying.
Stevie, it was, unless you're an Aston Villa fan, this was a really hard game to watch, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it was really drab. You could see exactly what Aston Villa were doing. You could see that Aston Villa know that Spurs are a little suspect defensively. You can hit them on the break. And pretty much that was it. I mean, it's not that difficult to figure out what Tottenham try and do. And in particular, going forward, when you sit tight against them, you know, the one guy that you're scared of that plays for Tottenham is a centre-forward called Harry Kane. You don't want anything to do with him, certainly in the penalty box. Well, Harry Kane hardly ever spends any time now in the penalty box. You know, they don't have a so-called playmaker in the middle of the park. The players they have up front are all about, you know, getting some space and using their pace to break in behind with the likes of Richarlison and particularly Son. And so when there's none of that space and you've got Harry Kane dropping deep to be your playmaker, then who's getting the ball? You know, Harry Kane can't come and get it and then play himself in. Because right now, that seems to be the only option that Spurs have. And defensively, they've been horrible all season. It's one thing to struggle going forward. You know, Spurs and other teams, you know, thinking of Chelsea as well. But it's another thing to have your defence, which just looks as though it's going to give goals away every time they step on the field. Today, Lloris was back to his, I've got a mistake in me best, and they end up one behind. So it's not that difficult to see where Spurs' problems are. But as Craig said, eventually Conte might take some responsibility for the way they play and how they set up defensively.
Did you enjoy this, Frank?
No, I didn't. Well, I enjoyed watching, you know, Aston Villa and seeing Mings, you know, being good, because he's been quite shaky in the past. And to see the middle of the park, you know, with Kamara, McKean, Douglas Luiz and Buendia playing very, very well. And he explains maybe why, you know, Aston Villa won that game. Kamara played like, you know, Casemiro at his best, you know, getting so many ball backs and serving the others magnificently. And yes, we saw nothing from Tottenham. And I'm fed up, you know, hearing Mr. Conte in the press conference, in the post-press conference, saying that he wants more money. He wants players with, you know, with more status. You have players, even yes, if you have some players injured or missing because of the World Cup. What I see in the sheet before the game is a very much decent team and a team who can beat the Villains. But because of your strategy, because of your tactic, they don't do anything. you know, when you see with that shit, you see only international players. So don't tell me you can't do better with that. Those players are talented players, but they don't play the way they should play. And I agree with Craig. The only one guilty for that result and that non-performance is Mr. Conte.
Just confirm, Frank was saying sheet there. Jules, looking at it, it was a bit like Conte bingo, wasn't it, afterwards, in the sense that he said it was a miracle, we finished top 4 last season, I need more money, I need better players. We hear it time and time again, but surely that isn't the reason that for the 10th game in a row they conceded the first goal.
No, that's not the reason. You're right. I mean, they were lucky not to fall behind in the first half because that's usually what they do, and then they come back in the second half. Except that today there was just no comeback. There was just nothing in that performance at all, collectively, individually. I agree with everything the boys said. What I thought made it even worse is that at the end, Conte threw the towel in a way of wanted to show to Daniel Levy and the ownership and Joe Lewis, if he was watching from his boat, wherever, in the Bahamas or Barbados, wherever he is, saying, oh, look, this is the players I have. Pape Matar coming on, had never played in the Premier League before. Jet Spence at the end, which was clearly not to win the game or not to come back because those guys can't do it. They're not ready for that level yet. Even Brian Hill starting, for me, I kind of saw it in a way of Conte saying, look, I really have nobody. I've got nothing. If I don't have Kulusevski, Richarlison, Bentancur, look at the rest. Look at what I have. I have to play with Brian Hill from the start, which is basically playing with 10 men because Brian Hill is not good enough for that level anyway. But at the end, for him to put all make those crazy substitutions for no reasons, for players who are not good enough, it was to show like, look, this is what I've got to do and what I've got to work with. And then we knew that after that, in this press conference, it would go on and on and on about, well, I don't have enough players, maybe 5th is the best we can do, don't have expectations, don't do this, don't do that, which is, again, not good enough. I would be mad if I was Joe Lewis or Daniel Levy tonight.
And added to that, obviously, you think, right, am I going to back this manager? Am I going to give him more money to spend to a man who won't commit his future to the club?
Exactly. Well, listen, we talked at the time, just prior to him coming in, how this potentially could unravel. And I think it's heading that way. This is not new. And yeah, look, at Juventus he turned it around and they won leagues, lots of them. At Inter he turned it around. At Chelsea he turned it around. I don't think anybody's really expecting him to turn this around and all of a sudden be better than Man City and Arsenal and Liverpool. The 3 teams, certainly 2 of those teams have been hugely successful recently. Arsenal could be this year. But I think the expectation has to be that the paying public, the Tottenham supporters and that new big flashy stadium have to be at least watching something that's not as pedestrian. And that's been nice to it, pedestrian. I mean, there was 2 World Cup winners in that side, and Lloris and Romero, and Perisic who's been in World Cup finals, and Harry Kane, who, along with Benzema and Lewandowski, is revered as one of the best in the business. Emil Højbjerg's a regular in the Danish side, and we know that the Danes had a poor World Cup, but they're actually a very good side. So there is plenty to work with. And when I look at the complaints, I look at a comparison with Newcastle United. Yes, Newcastle United have ownership that could go out and spend, if you're not bringing financial fair play in, could probably go out and spend 500 million, right? But that hasn't happened as yet. They signed Alexander Isak as a big signing at 60 or 70 million. But when you're talking, how many times do you hear Eddie Howe coming out and saying, I can't work with Dan Burn.
Yeah.
I can't work with Trippier. I can't work with Joe Willock. I can't work with Sean Longstaff. I can't work with Wood and Callum Wilson. And guy from MLS, by the way, Miguel Almer. I can't work with people who are playing in MLS. No. It's how can we get the best out of this group? How can we get them performing at their best? And yeah, they didn't have a great result at the weekend. But we've seen, with not a lot of money spent, with some shrewd, good quality pros, that you can get a tune out of these teams that are not Man City and Liverpool, and haven't got the best centre-half and the best goalkeeper and the best striker, but yet that comes down to coaching.
Yeah.
And to some extent, we have seen it with Newcastle, who could have went into second place. And all we're hearing week after week from Antonio Conte is, as you said, more money. and basically just slandering these players. I mean, if I was one of his players, I'd be turning around and saying, this guy just throws us under the bus. Every time we get an average result in performance, it's all because of us and not because of him.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, Stevie. How do these sort of responses go down regarding the morale in the dressing room?
Well, there's no question you're sick of listening to it. You know, good players will ultimately look at themselves first and foremost and think, how did I do? Did I do my bit? Could I have done more? You know, how am I involved in the mistakes? Or, I mean, the good things, they'll go through the whole gamut. My wonder, and maybe Jules could enlighten me in particular, because I don't know what kind of guy that Daniel Levy is. If Daniel Levy's any sort of football person, he's not going to be falling for this sort of flannel about we're building a core and we're doing this and we're doing that. If Daniel Levy's any sort of football person, he's going to sit down with Conte and say, right, I've got a really easy question for you here. This is an easy football question. You've come in and you've solidified us and you got us playing and you got us a fourth spot, and then you went and spent money and I brought you in some players that you wanted, and the team's now playing worse than it was before I gave you that money and you brought in players that you wanted. So I don't expect you to win the Premier League, and maybe I don't expect you to be challenging straight away for the Premier League, but I expect some sort of level of consistency and some sort of performance, and I certainly expect to look out on the field and figure out what we're trying to do. That's what I want to know. Is Daniel Levy smart enough in football terms to ask those questions? Because those are the questions that whoever's backing Conte or whoever's deciding whether to give him money has to know whether this is right or wrong. Because there's no question, with the names on the back of the shirts and the squad that he has, they are underperforming big time. He's the coach. That's his responsibility. Who's asking that question, if they are?
Jules?
It's a very good question from Stevie. Daniel Levy is a businessman, to start with. Let's be honest here. He's someone who is capable of hiring Nuno Espirito Santo, for example, for like, I mean, why? What attracted you to Nuno, for example? And to go from Mourinho to Conte to managers who have just no profile, no continuity, no plan, certainly no mid to long-term plan. So he clearly does his business as a football CEO, because this is what he is really, just on the short term, which I don't think that is the answer now. And then maybe this is why Spurs haven't won anything since 2009 now, and that was a League Cup, by the way. That's the reason why they haven't won the league since 1961, because there's a point where you just don't build by changing managers every 18 months or 2 years or maybe 3 years. If you're a bit lucky, and you can build the best stadium and the best training ground in the world, which is pretty much what they have right now, and you can still have some top player, which is what they have right now, as we've explained already, and still spend money in the summer, which they have done now again. And this is not enough, because the guy who's at the top of the whole organization and planning, I mean, just below you, who's your manager, your coach, is just not good enough. And this one is not the answer. The one before was not the answer. The one before was not the answer. And the one before was not the answer. And I think for all the blame that we can put on Antonio Conte and all his excuses and everything, and the players also have to take some blame, of course, but Daniel Levy has a huge blame to take. And Joe Lewis as well, who is the most invisible owner in the history of the top clubs in Europe, is also partly to blame.
Well, thank you very much for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming, premium content, and let's not forget as well, ESPN FC 7 days a week. Subscribe to ESPN+.